Crestwood, a small town nestled in the shadow of a once thriving mining operation, stood on the brink of collapse. The town, which had once been a bustling hub of activity, now seemed like a ghost of its former self. The streets were cracked, the houses worn down by years of neglect, and the faded signs that once advertised local businesses barely clung to their posts, forgotten by time. The residents were a mixture of the old and the forgotten, many of them born in the town, but all feeling the weight of a future that seemed uncertain at best. The mining industry, which had supported the town for generations, had long since dried up, leaving behind nothing but empty mines and dreams that never came to fruition. The businesses that once prospered now stood boarded up, and the schools were nearly empty, with fewer and fewer children to fill the classrooms. The lifeblood of the town had evaporated, and with it, so had the community's spirit. The town's leadership was fractured, with politicians more focused on personal gain than on the town's survival. The town council, once filled with passionate individuals who cared deeply about Crestwood's future, was now a shadow of its former self-divided, ineffective, and disillusioned. The people had grown weary, resigned to the idea that nothing could change. The air was thick with a sense of inevitability, as if the town had simply run its course. The residents, though kind-hearted and hard-working, had little to look forward to beyond the mundane routine of their daily lives. They spoke of moving away, of starting over in a better place, but there was nowhere left to go. Crestwood was a dying town, and everyone knew it. It was in this backdrop of despair that a stranger arrived. His name was James, though no one knew that at first. He wandered into Crestwood on a crisp autumn morning, his boots heavy with the dust of the road, his clothes worn from months of travel. He had the look of someone who had no particular place to be, someone who had come from somewhere far away. He didn't seem to be searching for anything, and yet, when he arrived, it was as though the entire town had been waiting for him without even realizing it. James wasn't tall or imposing, and he didn't carry any sort of grand presence about him. He was just a man, an ordinary man, and yet there was something in his demeanor that made people take notice. His eyes were calm and steady, his movements deliberate, but there was an unmistakable quiet strength about him. He didn't look like a savior, nor did he act like one. He simply existed in the town, unobtrusive, but unmistakably there. James made his way into the local diner that morning, ordered a cup of coffee, and sat by the window. The hustle of the town carried on around him, but it was clear that he was not a part of it, not yet, at least. He watched as the world moved by, a calm presence amidst the usual chaos of the morning. The diner's patrons paid him no mind at first, dismissing him as just another traveler passing through. But as the hours went on, something changed. People began to notice the way he interacted with the world. It was subtle, a kind word here, a helping hand there, but the difference it made was undeniable. He helped an elderly man carry his groceries, fixed a broken chair in the corner of the diner, and when the town's streetlights went out, he quietly took it upon himself to repair them, asking for nothing in return. What started as small, inconspicuous gestures soon began to stir something in the hearts of the townspeople. They watched him, puzzled at first, but then something remarkable happened. Hope, long buried beneath years of neglect, began to resurface. It wasn't that James was offering solutions to the town's problems or that he had a plan to save them. It was the way he made them feel. He reminded them of something they had forgotten, that kindness still mattered, that compassion was still worth showing, even in the face of despair. And though no one could have predicted it at the time, James' quiet presence began to sow the seeds of a transformation that would change the course of Crestwood's future forever. James continued his quiet presence in Crestwood, and over time, the effects of his simple acts of kindness began to ripple through the town in ways no one had expected. At first, no one noticed anything extraordinary, just the drifter fixing a broken window here, sweeping up debris in the town square. But as the days turned into weeks, something shifted in the hearts of the people. The residents of Crestwood, who had once felt abandoned and forgotten, began to feel the warmth of a community they hadn't realized they had lost. It wasn't the large gestures or grand speeches that were making a difference. It was the small, everyday acts of compassion and care that James had quietly woven into the fabric of their daily lives. Old Mr. Evans, the retired miner who had spent most of his days in solitude, found himself spending more time in the town square, chatting with others, even laughing. He had once been a quiet man, isolated by his grief over the loss of his wife many years ago, but now he shared stories with anyone who would listen. It was as though the simple act of seeing James and witnessing his quiet care for the town had given him a new sense of purpose. Mrs. Carver, the widow who ran the town's small bakery, began to open her shop more often, greeting customers with a smile that hadn't been there in years. She took to bringing in fresh bread for the local school, and for the first time in years, the children of Crestwood began to feel the warmth of the town, not just from their families, but from each other. It was these small, often unnoticed changes that had begun to stir a sense of connection, a recognition of shared humanity that had been lost in the rush of survival. James didn't know it at the time, but his efforts were slowly but surely rebuilding something in Crestwoods, something that had been destroyed over time. He wasn't trying to fix the town's broken economy, nor was he interested in changing the town's leadership. He simply wanted to help people, to restore a sense of community where there had once been none, and that was enough. The more he helped, the more the people began to take notice of their own capacity for kindness, their own ability to affect change, no matter how small. Conversations shifted from complaints about the town's fate to discussions about how they could improve it together. There was a sense of unity that had been absent for so long, and it was all because of the drifter who had quietly walked into their lives. One of the most profound shifts came in the town's leadership. The town council, which had long been fractured and ineffective, began to come together. Mayor Thompson, a man who had grown complacent in his position, was forced to reconsider his own role in the town's decline. He had once viewed the town's fate as something beyond his control, as something that simply happened over time. But now, seeing the way the community had begun to reawaken, he realized that change started from the ground up, not in the offices of politicians, but in the hearts of the people. Inspired by the quiet example James had set, Mayor Thompson started making small changes in the town. He encouraged town meetings where the residents could voice their concerns and suggestions. He opened the door to collaboration, inviting the people to work with him rather than simply allowing them to drift aimlessly. In the weeks that followed, the town council grew more active. They began to invest in small projects that would slowly start revitalizing Crestwood. New paint job for the school, a community garden initiative, and even the restoration of the old theatre that had been left to rot for years. The people, inspired by James' example, began to volunteer their time, their energy, and their resources. It wasn't long before the town had a new sense of purpose. It was a slow process, one that didn't come without its challenges. But the foundation had been laid, and the town of Crestwood was beginning to believe, for the first time in years, that there was hope. And at the heart of it all was James, the drifter who had wandered into their lives with nothing but his kindness, and in doing so, had unknowingly set into motion the rebirth of a community. As the town of Crestwood began to come alive once again, a quiet undercurrent of change continued to build, much like a storm gathering on the horizon. Though James' presence had sparked a shift in the community, there were still those who questioned the sustainability of the transformation. Not everyone in the town was ready to believe that a few kind gestures could turn the tide. The reality of Crestwood's financial struggles was far from solved, and the deep divisions that had plagued the town for years were not easily healed. The townspeople were still burdened by the weight of their circumstances, and there were murmurs of doubt about whether this newfound sense of hope could actually carry them through the challenges ahead. But James, as he always did, remained a quiet observer. He did not push, did not try to force anything. He simply continued to help, to listen, and to be present. Despite the skepticism that lingered in some corners of the town, the momentum of change had already started to build its own force. Slowly, the people of Crestwood began to take ownership of their future. The local businesses, which had been teetering on the edge of collapse, started to see a slow but steady uptick in customers. The community garden project that had begun as a simple initiative to provide fresh produce to local families turned into something much more. People from all walks of life began to contribute their time and skills, from the young to the elderly, all working together to create something tangible or symbol of the town's newfound unity. The garden flourished, producing not only food but a renewed sense of pride in the people who tended it. It became a gathering place, a reminder that they were all in this together, that the future was something they could shape, no matter how small the steps. But it wasn't just the physical transformation of the town that began to take shape, was the spiritual awakening of Crestwood. A town that had once been defined by its brokenness now found itself slowly rebuilding its community ties. The gossip and divisiveness that had once filled the air were replaced by conversations about the future, about what they could do to bring Crestwood back from the brink of ruin. The local church, once a place of dwindling attendance, became a hub for the community to gather, share ideas, and pray for the future. The spirit of unity, once thought lost, was rekindled. The belief in something better, something greater than individual struggles, began to replace the cynicism that had taken root. And at the heart of it all was James, whose quiet influence and consistent kindness had given the town something more valuable than gold-hope. Yet, as the changes took root, so did the realization that the town's future would ultimately depend on the strength of its leaders. James had sparked the fire, but it would take the commitment and leadership of the town's residents to keep it burning. Mayor Thompson, once a figurehead with no real vision, found himself re-energized by the collective effort of the town. His role had evolved from passive leader to active participant. The community began to look to him for guidance, and he found himself more and more inspired by the work being done around him. He knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that the town still faced financial difficulties, and that there would be moments of setback and hardship. But for the first time in years, he believed in the possibility of Crestwood's future, and he was not alone. The people who had once been content to simply survive were now willing to fight for their town, to invest in its future, and to believe in the dream of something better. One of the most significant turning points came when James, without fanfare or expectation, approached Mayor Thompson with an idea. "Why don't we bring in some of the town's old businesses back to life?" James asked one afternoon. The idea was simple but brilliant. The town's old mine, once the heart of Crestwood's economy, had been abandoned for decades, leaving only a crumbling structure behind. But what if, James suggested, they could turn it into a community-driven arts and culture center? What if they could bring in local artisans, craftsmen, and entrepreneurs to revive the town's economy? It was a risky proposition, but one that had the potential to breathe new life into the heart of Crestwood. The proposal sparked a wave of excitement among the residents, and soon people from all over the town rallied behind the idea. The project was ambitious, but the town had learned something important from James. It was no longer enough to wait for change to come, they had to create it themselves. As plans for the arts center began to take shape, it became clear that the town had reached a critical moment. The people of Crestwood had realized that their future lay in their own hands, and with James' quiet guidance, they had begun to take ownership of their destiny. The arts center would become a symbol of their resilience, a testament to the power of community, and the belief that even the smallest acts of kindness could lead to the most profound changes. Months passed, and the once-worn town of Crestwood began to hum with a renewed energy. The project to transform the old mine into a community-driven arts and culture center had taken on a life of its own. What started as a simple idea, quietly proposed by James, had blossomed into a full-fledged movement. The people of Crestwood, once resigned to their fate, now worked together with a shared sense of purpose, their hands and hearts intertwined in the rebuilding of their town. The Arts Center wasn't just a physical space, it was a symbol of their collective effort, of their belief that, despite their past struggles, they could still create something beautiful from the ashes of their former lives. It wasn't easy. The process was slow, and there were setbacks along the way. The town's financial resources were limited, and many of the older buildings needed extensive repairs. But each challenge only seemed to strengthen the resolve of the townspeople. What was remarkable, however, was not just the physical transformation of the mine into an arts hub, but the transformation within the hearts and minds of the people. The sense of unity and community that had been reignited in Crestwood grew stronger with each passing day. The town, once divided and fragmented, now came together in ways that no one had ever imagined. People who had once been strangers, or, worse, adversaries, now worked side by side, sharing ideas, skills, and hopes for the future. The Arts Center became a focal point of this new spirit. It wasn't just a place for art to be displayed. It was a place where creativity, culture, and history were woven together to celebrate the town's identity. Local artisans, young and old, contributed their talents. Woodworkers, painters, musicians, and writers all bringing their craft to the space, creating a vibrant tapestry of artistic expression. But as the Arts Center began to take shape, so too did the realization that the town's rebirth was not just about economic recovery. It was about something deeper, about healing the wounds that had existed for so long within the community. It was about learning to trust one another again, to care for one another, and to recognize the value of each individual. The people of Crestwood had come to understand that they were not just surviving, they were thriving. And at the heart of it all was James, the drifter who had wandered into their town with nothing but a willingness to help. He had never sought recognition, never asked for anything in return, yet his quiet actions had sparked a change that no one could have predicted. His kindness had not just saved a town, it had saved its spirit. The town's residents now saw themselves through a different lens. They weren't just a community on the brink of collapse. They were a community with a future, a purpose, and a story to tell. Asterisk, as the grand opening of the arts center approached, the entire town gathered to celebrate the fruits of their collective labor. There was music, laughter, and an overwhelming sense of pride in the air. The event was more than just a ribbon-cutting ceremony, was a declaration of Crestwood's new identity. It was a testament to the resilience of its people and to the power of kindness to transform not just individuals, but entire communities. James stood at the back of the crowd, watching with a quiet smile. He had never sought the spotlight, never wanted to be the center of attention. But as he looked at the faces around him, faces that had once been filled with doubt and despair, he knew that the town had changed. Not because of one man, but because of the collective will of its people. The drifter, who had wandered into Crestwood without a plan, had unknowingly sparked a revolution of the heart. He had given them something invaluable: hope. Asterisk, as the evening wore on, Mayor Thompson stood up to speak. His voice, once shaky with uncertainty, now rang with conviction. This town, he said, looking out over the crowd, was saved not by big ideas or grand gestures. It was saved by the simple acts of kindness, by the quiet strength of those who believed that, even in the darkest times, we could build something better. James, you've taught us all that change starts not with big plans, but with small acts of love and care. You have shown us what it means to be a community again. There was a moment of silence before the crowd erupted in applause. James, though embarrassed, nodded in acknowledgement, his heart swelling with gratitude. He hadn't come to Crestwood to be thanked or celebrated. He had come because he saw a town in need, and he had done what he could. But as he looked at the faces of the people now united, now hopefully he realized that his journey had been about much more than helping a town. It had been about rediscovering the power of human connection, and how, sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can create ripples that last for generations. Asterisk, in the days that followed the opening of the arts Center, Crestwood's future began to unfold in ways that no one could have predicted. New businesses opened, the town's population began to grow, and, most importantly, the people began to believe in themselves again. It was a long road, and there would still be challenges to face, but Crestwood had learned an invaluable lesson: that even the smallest gesture of kindness could lead to profound change. And as James left Crestwood, continuing on his journey, he knew that his time in the town had come to an end. But what he had left behind, the sense of possibility, the belief in community, would live on, carried by the people whose lives he had quietly touched.